Hey, welcome back. Today's video is about putting a new barrel on the PRS rifle. But when I say new barrel, I actually mean a subsequent barrel because there's three things that this barrel has in common with the previous barrels. The first is the bore and groove diameter. The second is the reamer used to ream it. And the third is the gunsmith. With all three of those common between barrels, we can take advantage of some opportunities that present themselves in this process. And I'll show you that as I go through the process. The whole video is about how I treat a brand new barrel when it comes into my competition setup. And before we get too far along, I'm sure somebody's going to ask about the old barrel. The old barrel had 2,300 rounds on it. It was still shooting well. It had only lost about 30 or 40 feet a second of velocity and has no signs of being worn out at this point. Instead, this is a preemptive change. We're changing it to make sure that for the heavy part of the season in March, April, and May, that I have a fresh barrel so I can get through the entire 3-month period without having to stop and do any low development activities in the interim. In other words, I'm trying to maximize the potential for my rifle for my future competition use. With all that said, let's get started on this particular new barrel. First thing we did was mount it. Can't show you that on YouTube. They won't allow it. The second thing I did was wipe out the inside of the barrel with dry patches, just to get that reaming lube out of the barrel. Anything left over. Keith uses a really good lube and it's not going to hurt anything, but just dry the barrel out before we start. The last thing that I did before I fired the first shot was load a whole bunch of ammunition because we need to go to the range and spend some time there getting this barrel broke in. Right, left, right. The range session went extremely well. I started by zeroing the rifle and then checking the velocity after about 15 rounds were through the tube. 2794 with an ES and SD that really didn't matter because we're trying to figure out if the barrel has broken in or not. After 80 rounds, I chronographed again. 5 shots, averaged 2854. And as a matter of fact, that means that this barrel is completely broken in already. In the interim, I shot the remaining rounds doing drills, practicing the scoop and shoot method for getting from position to position, picking up the bag and rifle as a single unit to move it, which saves a great deal of time on your stages. All in all, I got the benefit of training and practice while breaking in a barrel with absolutely no patches, no solvent, no cleaning rod, and no messing around. Speaking of which, after 100 rounds, it's probably time to clean this barrel for the first time. There's no copper in that barrel. Now this is going to seem odd for a PRS rifle, but I'm using my front rest today, mostly to minimize the impact of my shooting on the groups that I shoot. In other words, if we have 3 variables, the rifle, the ammunition, and the shooter, whatever we can do to mitigate the impact of the shooter on the system is going to be a good thing. Even with someone as skilled as me, I want to minimize my impact on my shots so that I can get the best read of what the rifle's doing downrange. Since I had the scope off to make that video about putting the scope mount back on, we probably ought to zero the rifle before we do this. And I cleaned the barrel, so you could probably use a fouling too. Okay, 31.3. The low was 28.67, the high was 28.77, the average was 28.72, the ES was 10.2, and the standard deviation 3.1. So you're probably asking yourself already at this point in the video, how in the world did Keith determine that he was going to shoot 31.3, 31.4, and 31.5 when he hasn't done any load testing with this barrel? Let me take that one. You see, going from barrel to barrel to barrel, using the same reamer over and over and over again, and the same general barrel design, results in a situation where you know approximately where that barrel is going to shoot before you ever fire the first shot with it. What I mean is, at approximately what velocity you're going to find the node, which means that I can focus on the velocity range that I want for this initial load without having to worry quite so much about doing a full field experiment to try to figure out where it might shoot. I already know that information from previous barrels. So for this one, I'm doing 31.3, 31.4, and 31.5 with the full intention of finding the upper edge of this low node that I'm going to start in. In other words, I'm looking for where the barrel stops shooting. I'm expecting it to stop somewhere around 31.5, but I'm not sure if it's going to be 31.5 or 31.6. Either way, I just want to know where the top of that node is, because I can always come down and make sure that I'm still in the bottom and build up into the top, because it's very cold outside right now. And Varget is not completely insensitive. It does grow velocity as the temperature goes up, but it does it very, very slowly. In other words, I'm trying to build a tolerant load that I can use all year round without having to think about what's the temperature going to be at this next match. Let's get back to the range. Okay, next we're going to shoot 31.4, but I have to watch the snow because the snow tells me exactly which way the wind is blowing and if it's blowing. So what I'm looking for is a very consistent pattern of snow for each group, if I can. Now, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. That's kind of the way this goes. It's cold out here. We don't have a huge amount of time available to get this done, so we're just going to get it done before this winter storm gets any worse. So I see two zones in the snow. Behind the target, it's going left to right. And right here in front of my face, it's going right to left slightly. Straight down right in front of my face. Still have the left to right downrange. I'm getting a little right to left now. A little bit in the face. I need to stop. Condition has stabilized. That low was at 28.68, and then the average was 28.77. The ES was 14.7 with a standard deviation of 5. Okay, the barrel's cooled down. It is time to go ahead and load the magazine for the last time today with the 31.5 load. It is snowing like crazy out there now. It's just little flakes, but it's just torrents of it. The best part about it is I can see the wind very clearly. Like there's a left or right now. It's pretty significant, but I see it before I feel it. That's one of the cool things about having a little bit of snow in the air. You can actually see the wind. The same applies for cottonwood seeds and even light rain, mist, stuff like that. You can see the wind far before you can feel it. All right, so we got a magazine full. I'm going to pull the chamber flag out so I can actually see the magazine. But with no further ado, let's get this done. Snow straight down to that shot. I suspect the snow is really screwing with the Garmin. I'm seeing nearly vertical snow in the foreground, but behind my target I can see a strong right to left. Okay, all done. That group sucks. There's no question about it. Now we have an ES of 18.6, which is more consistent with normal situations. The standard deviation is still 11. It's very high standard deviation at 31.5. That's not terribly unexpected, so to speak, because it starts to shoot like crap at that point, which means that we are too hot. We've come out of the node. So what do we do about that? We go down. 31.3 seems to have shot well, 31.4 shot well, 31.45, 46 shot well, but the ES started increasing and so did the SD, so we need to keep that in mind. So now we just need to analyze our groups, and I'll show you pictures on the screen here so you can see them all, but ultimately it is, well, not terribly hard to figure out what's working and what's not. 31.3 had an average group size of 387 with a 500 for the first one and a 273 for the second one. I can't say that the 500 wasn't my fault. With that aside, let's go to 31.4. 435 on the first one, and the second one was 201. So once again, we had a good second group. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us that the barrel wants to throw a first shot or two after it's cooled down quite a bit. It was extremely cold, and I was letting the barrel get extremely cold between groups. It was also giving a very low velocity on the first shot as a result of that. Something to keep in mind when you're shooting stages for PRS. 31.5, I said it was ugly, and it was. 388 for the first one, and the second one was a 537. It absolutely sucked for a precision rifle. But if we take all of these groups and combine them together with the magic of Adobe software, we can see what our total group size is for the whole group, so to speak, of 30 shots, to give us an idea of whether the barrel is any good or not, and to let us know what we can expect if we do get too hot. Well, this group is just a little over 600 thousandths for 30 shots. That is perfectly acceptable for a PRS rifle, and ultimately, across 3 charges, we did okay. By taking the bottom down 1/10 of a grain down to 31.2, we can probably make it a little bit better, but it's not worth the time or effort to test. Instead, we'll take 31.2 for our next practice session and go ahead and shoot a group or two with it just to see if it in fact stays together. But at this point, we're already done. We have a fully developed load based on previous data that we had, and we didn't waste a whole lot of barrel life doing it. Going forward, when am I going to clean this barrel again? After the next 200 rounds are through it. There's no use in cleaning the barrel unless it tells you that it needs it. I do it at 200 rounds because, well, I don't feel like I'm doing a good job of maintaining my guns if I don't clean them at least once in a while. Ultimately, it may go 400, 500, 600 rounds before it really needs it, but I'm not willing to wait quite that long. So guys, a new barrel is not a load development project. If it is made by the same manufacturer and uses the same reamer as your previous barrels, that is, if you're going to use the same components in that barrel. That's it for this one. Until next time, shoot straight, and I'll see you in the next video.